Everything you think you know about samurai is wrong. The movies show you a lone warrior. Silent. Deadly. Defined by his sword. But the historical samurai, the real samurai of feudal Japan, was something stranger, harder, and more complete than any film has depicted. The samurai training system was not about mastering one weapon. It was about mastering everything. And the physical demands of genuine samurai training were so extreme that modern athletes who attempt to replicate even a fraction of the regimen report it is unlike anything in contemporary sport. This is the real story. The samurai emerged as a distinct warrior class in Japan during the late Heian period, roughly the 10th and 11th centuries. They were initially mounted archers in the service of noble clans. And this is the first thing most people get wrong. The samurai was, first and foremost, an archer. The yumi, the Japanese asymmetric longbow, is one of the most unusual weapons ever developed. Unlike any other bow in the world, the grip is positioned 1/3 of the way up from the bottom rather than at the center. This creates a unique draw and release dynamic that requires a completely different technique from any other archery tradition. The bow itself stands over 2 meters tall, taller than most of its users. Mastering the yumi took years, not months. Years of daily practice to develop the specific muscle coordination, shoulder stability, and draw consistency required to shoot accurately from horseback at full gallop. Early samurai trained in mounted archery, Yabusame, from childhood. The physical demands were extraordinary. Controlling a war horse with the legs and lower body while drawing a 2-meter bow with both hands and acquiring a moving target while moving yourself. This is a multi-layered athletic challenge that no single modern sport approaches. Yabusame is still practiced in Japan today as a ceremonial art. When modern practitioners attempt to learn it, the typical timeline to achieve basic competence is 3 to 5 years of dedicated practice. The historical samurai who were expected to perform this in actual combat trained for their entire lives. But the sword. The katana is perhaps the most famous weapon in human history. And the training system developed around it, Kenjutsu, which later evolved into Kendo, is one of the most sophisticated single-weapon disciplines ever created. Here is what most people do not understand about sword training in the samurai tradition. The physical demands are not primarily about strength. They are about precision, timing, and the elimination of hesitation. A samurai sword fight was typically measured in seconds. Preparation for those seconds required decades. Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest swordsman in Japanese history, undefeated in over 60 duels, wrote in his treatise The Book of Five Rings that the way of the warrior is about constant, unceasing practice until the correct action occurs without thought. He was describing what modern neuroscience calls motor automaticity, the state in which a skilled movement is executed by the procedural memory system without conscious deliberation. The conscious mind is too slow for actual combat. The body must have internalized the movements so completely that they happen before the mind decides. Achieving this state in sword technique required 10,000 repetitions of basic cuts, then 100,000. The practice never stopped because the standard was not competence. The standard was automaticity under life or death pressure. The physical conditioning that supported this skill development was comprehensive. Samurai practiced sumo wrestling, which at its origin was a martial art, not a sport, used to develop explosive power, body control, and the ability to break an opponent's structure. They swam in full armor to develop strength and water survival capability. They ran long distances as standard military preparation. They practiced a form of meditation called Zazen, seated mindfulness practice, for hours at a time, developing the mental stillness that allowed lethal precision under extreme stress. And they wore their armor. Samurai armor, yoroi, weighed between 15 and 30 kilograms depending on the period and style. Training and fighting in this weight, moving, riding, climbing, swimming, developed a foundation of functional strength that modern athletes in specialized sports rarely achieve. Your body adapts to the demands placed on it. A samurai whose daily existence involved moving in 30 kilograms of armor developed a baseline strength and endurance that modern strength training, isolated and artificial as it is, cannot fully replicate. There is a concept in the samurai tradition called Shugyo, austere, difficult training deliberately chosen to forge the self. Shugyo was not just physical. It was the intentional seeking out of discomfort, cold, hunger, exhaustion, and difficulty as a means of developing mental and physical resilience simultaneously. Samurai would practice sword forms in freezing rivers in winter. They would train through illness. They would deliberately seek conditions that made practice harder, not easier. Modern sports science has a phrase for this: voluntary hardship exposure. Research in elite military training and extreme sport psychology consistently shows that deliberate exposure to controllable hardship builds both physiological resilience and psychological tolerance for adversity. The samurai codified this principle 600 years before the research existed. The result of this system, decades of daily practice across archery, swordsmanship, wrestling, horsemanship, swimming, and meditation, sustained by a philosophy that treated suffering as the price of excellence, was a class of warriors whose physical and mental development was extraordinary even by modern standards. When Western military forces first encountered Japanese martial artists in the 19th century, they were consistently astonished by the physical capabilities on display. Not raw strength, though that was present. It was the precision, the speed, the complete absence of wasted movement, and the absolute mental composure that observers found difficult to believe. This was not natural talent. This was the product of a system that began in childhood, never ended, and treated physical and mental development as a single unified pursuit. The samurai understood something that modern training culture has largely forgotten. Skill and strength are not separate categories. Mental composure and physical capacity are not separate categories. The warrior is not a collection of attributes. The warrior is a unified entity, and training must develop the whole entity, not its components in isolation. The modern gym separates everything. Cardio day, leg day, shoulder day. Mental health is something you do separately, if at all. The samurai, and every great warrior tradition we have examined in this series, treated this separation as absurd. You trained everything, together, always, because that is how you would need to perform